The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with the usual mix of translated languages, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that had become as familiar to Ambassador Sarah Chen as her morning coffee. She sat quietly in the human delegation's modest section, watching as the various alien species debated the latest territorial dispute between the Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Confederacy. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council for only 3 years now, ever since first contact had been established through a rather awkward encounter involving a lost human survey ship and a Vorthon trade vessel. The meeting had gone surprisingly well, considering neither species had expected to find intelligent life in that particular sector. Now humanity was slowly finding its place among the stars, though that place seemed to be somewhere near the bottom of the galactic food chain. Sarah adjusted her translation earpiece as High Counselor Vexthon, a towering mantis-like creature from Kepler 442b, called for order with a series of sharp clicks that even the translators struggled to render into human speech. The debate had been going on for hours, and Sarah could see the frustration building among the more militant species. "The Zephyrians have violated the Neutral Zone Treaty for the last time," declared General Cramor of the Draconic Alliance, his scaled head weaving back and forth in agitation. The translation made his voice sound like gravel in a blender, but the anger was unmistakable. They must be taught that such aggression has consequences. From across the chamber, the Zephyrian representative, a floating jellyfish-like being enclosed in a mobility suit, pulsed with indignant colors. The Crystalline Confederacy expanded their mining operations beyond the agreed boundaries first. "We were merely protecting our legitimate interests." Sarah had heard variations of this same argument dozens of times since joining the council. It always came down to the same thing. Who had the bigger fleet, the more advanced weapons, the greater capacity for destruction? The galaxy, it seemed, operated on the same principles that had governed human civilization for millennia, just on a much larger scale. Perhaps, interjected Counselor Thys of the Ethereal Collective, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, we should consider economic sanctions rather than military action. The Galactic Trade Commission could impose restrictions that would encourage both parties to return to the negotiating table. General Cramor's laugh was a sound like breaking glass. "Sanctions? Against species that control entire star systems? You might as well throw pebbles at a battle cruiser, Counselor Thys. Sometimes only superior firepower can restore order." This was Sarah's cue to pay closer attention. Whenever the discussion turned to military matters, the human delegation was expected to remain silent. Not because their input wasn't welcome, but because it was generally considered irrelevant. Humanity's small fleet of converted civilian vessels and hastily constructed defense platforms were seen as quaint by galactic standards, roughly equivalent to bringing a wooden club to a particle beam fight. The humans had tried to compensate for their technological disadvantage through diplomacy and trade, offering unique perspectives and cultural exchange. They had some success, particularly with species that valued creativity and unpredictability. But when it came to matters of real galactic importance, matters that might require force, humanity was politely ignored. "The Terran delegate remains suspiciously quiet," observed Director Zonkar of the Hegemony Council, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of amusement. "Perhaps the humans have some primitive projectile weapons they wish to contribute to the discussion." A ripple of what Sarah's translator interpreted as laughter passed through the chamber. She had learned to recognize the various forms of alien humor, and this particular brand was becoming tiresomely familiar. It wasn't malicious exactly, but it carried the condescending affection one might show to a clever pet that had learned an amusing trick. Sarah stood slowly, her movement causing the nearby conversations to quiet. "The Terran delegation appreciates Director Zonkar's humor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "However, we would like to formally request that the Council consider allowing humanity to participate in the peacekeeping force that will inevitably be required to resolve this crisis." The silence that followed was complete. Even the ambient hum of the chamber's life support system seemed to pause. Then slowly the laughter began again, starting with a few isolated chuckles and building into a wave of mirth that washed over the entire assembly. High Counselor Vexthon raised one mantis-like appendage for silence. "Ambassador Chen," he said, his tone carefully neutral, While the Council appreciates humanity's willingness to contribute, perhaps it would be better if your species continued to focus on its strengths. Cultural exchange, trade facilitation, perhaps some of those interesting artistic endeavors you've been sharing with us. With respect, High Counselor, Sarah replied, maintaining her diplomatic composure despite the heat building in her chest. Humanity did not request to join the Council so that we could serve as the galaxy's entertainment committee. We are prepared to shoulder our share of responsibility, including military obligations. General Cramor leaned forward in his seat, which creaked ominously under his bulk. Ambassador, your largest warship mounts weapons that my personal shuttle could outgun. Your fastest vessels would take decades to cross distances our scouts cover in days. Your most advanced shields couldn't stop a meteorite, let alone military-grade plasma bombardment. How exactly do you propose to contribute to a peacekeeping mission? Sarah had been dreading this question, but she had prepared for it. General Cramor makes valid points about our technological limitations, she admitted. However, technology is not the only factor in military effectiveness. Humanity brings something to the table that may be unique among galactic civilizations. And what would that be? Asked Counselor Thys, genuine curiosity replacing the earlier amusement in her crystalline voice. Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the alien gazes directed at her. Some showed polite interest, others barely concealed disdain, and a few reflected the kind of pity one might feel for someone about to embarrass themselves publicly. She took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would determine humanity's standing in the galaxy for years to come. Experience, she said simply. We may not have the most advanced weapons or the fastest ships, but humanity has something that 10,000 years of galactic peace has cost many of you. We remember how to fight wars, not just battles. We understand conflict in ways that extend beyond technological superiority. Give us a chance to prove it. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different, thoughtful rather than amused. Sarah could see the alien delegates processing her words, weighing them against their assumptions about humanity's place in the galactic order. Finally, High Counselor Vexthon spoke. Very well, Ambassador Chen. The Council will consider humanity's request to join the peacekeeping force. However, understand that this will not be a symbolic gesture. If humanity participates, you will be held to the same standards as any other member species. Sarah nodded solemnly. We wouldn't expect anything less, High Counselor. As the session adjourned and the delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just committed humanity to something far more dangerous than anyone realized. But perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Captain Marcus Webb stood on the observation deck of the TSV Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced warship, watching the assembled galactic peacekeeping fleet through the reinforced viewport. The sight was both inspiring and deeply intimidating. Massive draconic dreadnoughts stretched for kilometers, their hulls bristling with energy weapons that could crack planets. Ethereal collective vessels floated like crystalline cathedrals, their translucent forms hiding devastating harmonic weapons that could shatter molecular bonds. Vorthan battlecruisers moved with predatory grace, their sleek hulls promising speed and firepower in equal measure. And then there was humanity's contribution to this magnificent fleet. 3 converted cargo haulers, 2 hastily retrofitted mining vessels, and the Defiance itself, which had been humanity's pride and joy until this moment. Now surrounded by the technological marvels of a dozen alien civilizations, it looked like exactly what it was. A primitive attempt at military engineering by a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel. Impressive sight, isn't it? Came a voice from behind him. Webb turned to see Commander Alara Thyseven of the Ethereal Collective approaching, her crystalline form refracting the starlight into dancing patterns across the deck. Unlike her cousin on the Galactic Council, Alara had volunteered for military service, one of the few ethereals to do so in recent centuries. That's one word for it, Webb replied, gesturing toward the alien fleet. I have to admit, Commander, I'm having some serious second thoughts about humanity's decision to participate in this mission. Alara moved to stand beside him at the viewport, her presence causing the air to shimmer slightly with residual energy. Your ships may not look impressive, Captain, but I've reviewed humanity's military history. Your species has accomplished remarkable things with inferior technology before. Webb couldn't help but smile at that. You've been reading our history files? I'm surprised they translated well. The mathematics of warfare are universal, Captain. Force multipliers, tactical innovation, strategic thinking. These concepts exist regardless of the specific technology involved. What interests me is how frequently humanity achieved victory against superior opponents, usually through superior numbers, home field advantage, or sheer luck, Webb admitted. None of which we have in this situation. The peacekeeping fleet had been assembled to deal with what the Galactic Council diplomatically called the Zephyrian situation, but which everyone understood to be a full-scale territorial war. The Zephyrians had responded to the Council's sanctions by declaring independence from galactic law and seizing control of 3 star systems that contained significant mining resources. Their fleet was large, well-equipped, and commanded by officers who had cut their teeth in the brutal Outer Rim conflicts. Perhaps, Alara said thoughtfully, but you also have something that most galactic civilizations have lost through centuries of peace. Adaptability born from necessity. When was the last time the Draconic Alliance faced an opponent who couldn't be intimidated by their reputation? When did the Vorthon Confederacy last encounter an enemy that didn't follow standard tactical doctrine? Webb considered this as he watched a squadron of Zephyrian interceptors patrol the edge of the disputed system. The alien fighters moved in perfect formation, their flight patterns precise and predictable. Beautiful to watch, but somehow sterile, as if they were following a choreographed routine rather than preparing for combat. The briefing is about to begin, Alara continued. Admiral Mordak of the Draconic Alliance will be outlining the battle plan. I suspect it will involve a great deal of overwhelming firepower applied directly to the enemy's strongest points. Webb nodded, having expected as much. The Draconic Alliance had dominated galactic military thinking for centuries, and their doctrine was as straightforward as it was effective. Identify the enemy's most powerful assets and destroy them with superior force. It had worked well in every major conflict since the formation of the Galactic Council, primarily because no one had been willing or able to challenge their technological supremacy. The 2 officers made their way to the Defiance's briefing room, which had been hastily enlarged to accommodate representatives from the various allied species. The room was packed with a bewildering array of alien forms, from the massive armor-plated Catherian generals to the delicate insectoid hive mind coordinators. At the head of the room, Admiral Mordak stood before a holographic display showing the tactical situation. The Zephyrian forces have consolidated around the mining platforms in the Kepler 438 system, the Admiral began, his translated voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. Their fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels, including 37 heavy cruisers and 12 dreadnought-class ships. Standard doctrine dictates a frontal assault on their primary battle line, followed by rapid exploitation of any breakthrough. Webb studied the tactical display, noting the positioning of the Zephyrian fleet. They had formed a defensive sphere around the mining platforms, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. It was a textbook defensive formation, one that would require massive casualties to overcome through direct assault. Admiral, Webb said, raising his hand to get attention, has consideration been given to alternative approaches? The Zephyrian formation is strong, but it's also predictable. Mordak's scaled head turned toward Webb with what might have been surprise. Captain Webb, is it? Your species' tactical input is appreciated, but this is not a situation that requires unconventional thinking. Overwhelming force properly applied will achieve victory with acceptable losses. Acceptable to whom? Webb asked quietly, but loud enough for the room to hear. That formation is designed to maximize casualties among attacking forces. They're counting on us to do exactly what you're suggesting. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Some showed interest, others irritation at having their battle plan questioned by a representative of what they considered a minor species. Captain Webb, said General Cathera of the Crystalline Confederacy, her multifaceted voice carrying undertones of annoyance. While creativity is admirable, military campaigns are won through superior firepower and proven tactics. The Zephyrians may be rebels, but they are not fools. They will expect us to use our technological advantages. Exactly, Webb replied, standing to address the room. They're expecting us to fight like galactic civilizations have fought for the past 1,000 years. What if we don't give them what they expect? Admiral Mordak leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. Very well, Captain. Since you seem to have strong opinions on the matter, please enlighten us with humanity's tactical wisdom. Webb moved to the holographic display, studying the positioning of forces. The Zephyrian fleet was indeed formidable, but there was something about their formation that nagged at him. It was too perfect, too symmetrical, as if it had been lifted directly from a military academy textbook. They've positioned their forces to counter a conventional attack, he said, highlighting sections of the display with a laser pointer. Heavy units forward, screening forces on the flanks. Command and control vessels protected in the center. It's designed to absorb and redirect whatever we throw at them, as any competent defensive formation would be, noted Commander Weistal of the Hive Mind Collective. This is basic military science, Captain. Yes, but look at what they're defending, Webb continued, zooming the display to focus on the mining platforms. These aren't just resource extraction facilities. They're industrial complexes capable of producing everything from refined materials to finished components. The Zephyrians aren't just stealing resources, they're building something. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If the Zephyrians were using the mining platforms as manufacturing bases, they could potentially produce enough military hardware to challenge the entire Galactic Council. Intelligence reports suggested they were simply seizing assets, Admiral Mordak said slowly. Are you suggesting they have larger ambitions? I'm suggesting we may be looking at this wrong, Webb replied. We're treating this like a rebellion to be suppressed, but what if it's actually the opening move of a much larger campaign? What if they want us to attack their fleet? Commander Alara leaned forward, her crystalline form brightening with interest. Explain your reasoning, Captain. Webb pointed to the tactical display again. Their defensive formation is strong, but it's also static. They're not trying to prevent us from reaching the mining platforms. They're trying to ensure we have to go through them to do it. Maximum casualties, maximum resource expenditure, maximum demonstration of their military capability to any other systems considering rebellion. The assembled officers exchanged glances, and Webb could see the shift in their thinking. What had seemed like a straightforward police action was beginning to look like something far more complex and dangerous. Even if your analysis is correct, General Kithra said eventually, the strategic situation remains unchanged. The Zephyrian forces must be defeated regardless of their motivations. Agreed, Webb said, but maybe we don't have to fight the battle they want us to fight. The strategy session had run for 6 hours and tensions were beginning to show. Admiral Mordak paced the length of the briefing room, his massive claws clicking against the deck plating with each step. The other fleet commanders sat around the holographic display, their various forms of body language all conveying the same message: frustration. This is madness, declared General Vorth of the Hegemony Fleet, his mechanical voice crackling with static. Captain Webb's proposal violates every principle of sound military doctrine. You cannot win battles by avoiding the enemy's strength. Webb remained standing beside the tactical display, where he had spent the better part of the last hour outlining his alternative approach to the Zephyrian problem. Instead of the frontal assault favored by Admiral Mordak, he had suggested something that the assembled alien commanders found deeply disturbing. A strategy based on deception, misdirection, and what he called asymmetric warfare. General Vorth, Webb replied calmly, with respect, sound military doctrine assumes that both sides are operating under similar constraints. The Zephyrians have superior defensive positions and technological parity with most of our forces. In that situation, conventional attacks will result in a Pyrrhic victory at best. Commander Alara, who had been studying the revised tactical projections, looked up from her datapad. The humans' mathematics are sound, she said, her crystalline voice carrying subtle harmonics of uncertainty. A direct assault on the Zephyrian positions would likely result in 60 to 70% casualties among the attacking forces, even assuming complete victory. Acceptable losses for a decisive engagement, Admiral Mordak rumbled. The Galactic Council cannot appear weak in the face of rebellion. Sometimes, overwhelming force is the only message that lesser civilizations understand. Webb felt a flash of anger at the casual dismissal of thousands of lives, but kept his voice level. Admiral, what if I told you we could achieve the same strategic objectives with minimal casualties and without giving the Zephyrians the propaganda victory they're looking for? I would say that you are either naive or delusional, came the blunt reply. Captain, your species has been part of the galactic community for barely 3 years. You have never faced opponents with energy weapons capable of vaporizing your entire fleet in minutes. You have no experience with the realities of modern warfare. This triggered a response from Captain Zethvar of the Vorthon Confederacy, whose sleek features twisted into what Webb had learned to recognize as disdain. The human speaks of deception and misdirection, as if warfare were some kind of elaborate game. In real combat, Captain Webb, survival depends on superior firepower and adequate shielding. Everything else is philosophical speculation. Webb moved to a different section of the holographic display, calling up a detailed schematic of the Zephyrian defensive network. Captains, with your permission, let me ask a question. How many major military engagements has the Galactic Council fought in the past 500 years? The question seemed to puzzle the assembled officers. Commander Thisivan of the Ethereal Collective was the first to respond. The border wars with the Outer Rim Confederacy, the suppression of the synthetic uprising, the pacification of the rebel worlds, perhaps a dozen significant campaigns. And how were those conflicts resolved? Webb continued. Through the application of superior technology and coordinated fleet actions, Admiral Mordak replied, his tone suggesting he found the question pointless. Standard galactic military doctrine, proven effective across multiple engagements. Webb nodded slowly. And in every case, the enemy was eventually forced to surrender when they realized they couldn't match your technological capabilities. But what happens when you face an opponent who already knows they can't win through conventional means? The room fell quiet as the implications of the question sank in. General Cathera leaned forward, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the light from the holographic display. You believe the Zephyrians are intentionally seeking a conventional engagement? I think they're counting on it, Webb replied. Look at their formation again. It's textbook defensive doctrine, but it's also designed to inflict maximum casualties on attacking forces. They're not trying to win this battle. They're trying to demonstrate that the cost of challenging the Galactic Council is higher than most civilizations are willing to pay. Commander Weistal of the Hivemind Collective made a sound that the translator rendered as thoughtful humming. If accurate, this would suggest a strategy of deterrence through demonstration, rather than simple territorial acquisition. Exactly, Webb said. They seize valuable resources, fortify their positions, and wait for the Council to respond with overwhelming force. When the casualty reports start coming in, other systems considering rebellion will have to weigh whether their grievances are worth facing similar losses. Admiral Mordak stopped, pacing and fixed Webb with a stare that would have been intimidating even without the translator's attempt to render his body language into human terms. Assuming your analysis is correct, Captain, what alternative do you propose? The Zephyrian positions must be taken, regardless of their motivations. Webb took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to suggest would sound insane to officers trained in conventional galactic warfare. We don't attack their positions at all. We make them irrelevant. The explosion of voices from around the room required nearly a full minute for the translators to sort out, but the general sentiment was clear. The assembled alien commanders thought Webb had finally revealed the depths of his tactical ignorance. Only Commander Alara remained silent, her crystalline form brightening with what Webb had learned to interpret as intense concentration. Explain, she said simply, her voice cutting through the din. Webb manipulated the holographic display, highlighting different sections of the Zephyrian defensive network. Their entire strategy depends on forcing us to attack their prepared positions. But what if we simply bypass them? Impossible, declared General Vorth. The mining platforms are the strategic objective. They cannot be bypassed. The platforms themselves, no, Webb agreed, but their value to the Zephyrians can be eliminated without directly attacking them. He called up a new display showing the industrial infrastructure of the occupied systems. The Zephyrians have turned these mining platforms into manufacturing centers, but they're still dependent on external supply lines. Raw materials, specialized components, technical expertise, they all have to come from somewhere. Captain Zethvar studied the display with growing interest. You're suggesting an economic blockade? I'm suggesting something more targeted than that, Webb replied. The Zephyrians have invested everything in fortifying their defensive positions. They're not expecting us to attack their supply infrastructure because, frankly, post-galactic civilizations consider such attacks beneath them. This statement caused another stir among the assembled officers. Commander Thysevin was the first to voice what several of them were thinking. "Captain Webb, are you suggesting we target civilian installations?" "I'm suggesting we target legitimate military objectives that happen to be less well defended than the main fleet concentration," Webb clarified quickly. "Supply depots, transport hubs, manufacturing facilities that support the military effort. All legitimate targets under galactic rules of engagement, but ones that the Zephyrians have left vulnerable because they assumed we would focus on their battle fleet." Admiral Mordak considered this for several long moments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of grudging respect. Such an approach would require detailed intelligence about Zephyrian logistics networks. Information that would take months to gather through conventional means. "Unless," Webb said quietly, "we had help from someone with intimate knowledge of their operations." The room fell silent again as the assembled commanders processed this statement. Commander Alara was the first to understand the implications. "You have a source within the Zephyrian command structure?" "Not exactly," Webb replied. "But we do have something almost as good. We have refugees." Over the past several months, as tensions between the Zephyrians and the Galactic Council had escalated, thousands of civilians had fled the occupied systems. Most had been relocated to refugee camps on neutral worlds, where they were providing humanitarian organizations with detailed accounts of conditions under Zephyrian rule. What no one had thought to do was systematically debrief them for military intelligence. Many of these people worked in the facilities that the Zephyrians have now militarized, Webb continued. They know the layouts, the supply requirements, the vulnerabilities. Information that's useless for conventional military planning but invaluable for the kind of targeted operations I'm suggesting. General Kythera leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. This approach would require significantly different tactics than those employed in previous council operations. "Our forces are not trained for such unconventional engagements." "Then it's fortunate," Webb said with a slight smile, "that the human forces have some experience in exactly this type of warfare." Admiral Mordak's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "Captain Webb, your largest warship masses less than..." 3 days later, the human vessel TSV Phantom drifted silently through the debris field that marked the remains of the Kepler 438 system's outermost planet. The ship was one of humanity's converted mining vessels, its hull scorched and battered to look like it had been caught in the crossfire of some forgotten skirmish. To any casual observer, it appeared to be nothing more than another piece of battlefield debris, slowly tumbling through space. Inside the ship's cramped command center, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Torres monitored the passive sensor array, while her team of 12 specialists prepared for what intelligence had designated Operation Ghostwalk. The mission was simple in concept and terrifyingly complex in execution. Infiltrate the Zephyrian supply network and gather the intelligence needed to implement Captain Webb's unconventional strategy. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, whispered Ensign Chen from the sensor station. "Zephyrian patrol vessel, Corvette class." Torres studied the tactical display, watching as the alien ship moved through its predetermined search pattern. The Zephyrians were thorough, she had to give them credit for that. Their patrols covered every major approach to the occupied system, and their sensor sweeps were comprehensive enough to detect most conventional military vessels at considerable range. Fortunately, the Phantom was anything but conventional. Her hull had been redesigned using principles borrowed from humanity's stealth aircraft programs, incorporating materials and techniques that were primitive by galactic standards but apparently novel enough to confuse alien sensors. The ship's heat signature had been reduced to barely above background radiation. Her electromagnetic emissions were masked by carefully placed debris, and her movement patterns had been programmed to mimic the random drift of space junk. "Corvette is moving off," Chen reported after what felt like an eternity. "We're clear to proceed." Torres nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The entire operation depended on assumptions about Zephyrian technology and tactics that might prove fatally incorrect. But Captain Webb had been convincing in his arguments, and the alternative was the kind of frontal assault that would leave thousands of Allied personnel dead regardless of the outcome. "Take us in. Slowly," she ordered. "I want us looking like debris until we're practically on top of our objective." The objective in question was a supply depot hidden in the asteroid belt surrounding Kepler 438's primary star. According to the refugees that intelligence had debriefed, it served as a distribution point for the specialized components needed to keep the mining platforms operational. More importantly, it was lightly defended, staffed primarily by civilian contractors who had worked for the mining consortium before the Zephyrian takeover. As the Phantom drifted closer to the asteroid belt, Torres reflected on the briefing that had brought her to this point. Captain Webb's presentation to the fleet commanders had been met with skepticism bordering on hostility, but the mathematics of conventional assault had been impossible to ignore. Even Admiral Mordak had eventually conceded that the casualties from a direct attack would be politically unacceptable, regardless of the military outcome. The compromise they had reached was typically bureaucratic. The main fleet would maintain position outside the system, while human special operations teams attempted to gather the intelligence needed for targeted strikes against Zephyrian logistics. If the humans succeeded, their approach would be adopted. If they failed, Admiral Mordak would proceed with his original plan. "I'm detecting the supply depot," Chen reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bearing 117 Mark II, range approximately 50,000 kilometers. Torres brought up the visual display, studying their target through the Phantom's passive sensors. The depot was larger than she had expected, a complex of interconnected modules anchored to a medium-sized asteroid. Dozens of cargo vessels moved back and forth between the depot and the asteroid belt, creating a constant flow of traffic that would provide excellent cover for their approach. "Initiate final approach," she ordered. "I want us in the traffic pattern with the cargo haulers." The next hour was an exercise in controlled terror as the Phantom maneuvered through the depot's traffic control zone, her crew constantly adjusting their course to avoid both scheduled cargo runs and random patrol sweeps. Torres found herself holding her breath as a massive Zephyrian cargo hauler passed within a few hundred meters of their position, its sensor array active and sweeping the space around them. "We're getting scanned," Chen whispered urgently. "Hold position," Torres replied, fighting the urge to order evasive maneuvers. Their stealth systems were designed to defeat exactly this kind of passive sensor sweep. But there was no way to be certain until the scanning vessel moved on. After what felt like several lifetimes, the cargo hauler completed its scan and continued on its planned route. Torres allowed herself a moment of relief before turning her attention back to the mission. "Take us to docking position 7, she ordered. "According to our intelligence, that's where they process incoming supply shipments." The docking approach was the most dangerous part of the operation. For several critical minutes, the Phantom would have to drop her stealth systems and present herself as a legitimate cargo vessel seeking to dock with the supply depot. The cover story was that they were an independent freighter, carrying replacement components for mining equipment, but it would only hold up under casual inspection. "Zephyrian control. This is independent freighter Wanderer requesting docking clearance," Torres transmitted, using a voice modulator to match the harmonic patterns of Zephyrian speech. "We have priority cargo for the mining operations." The response came back almost immediately, translated into passable standard by the communication system. "Freighter Wanderer, you are not on our scheduled arrival list. Provide authorization codes and manifest." Torres felt sweat beating on her forehead as she transmitted the forged documentation that intelligence had prepared. The codes were based on patterns observed in intercepted communications, but there was no guarantee they would pass detailed scrutiny. "Authorization codes confirmed," came the response after several tense moments. "Proceed to docking bay 7 for cargo inspection." As the Phantom approached the docking bay, Torres could see Zephyrian personnel moving around the facility's external structures. They appeared to be following standard commercial protocols, but she noticed that several of them were carrying military-grade energy weapons. "Remember," she told her team over the internal communication system, "we're cargo haulers, not soldiers. Act bored, act tired, act like you've been doing this job for too long and want to get it over with." The docking procedure went smoothly, with Zephyrian ground crew guiding the Phantom into position with practiced efficiency. Torres found herself impressed despite the circumstances. Whatever their political motivations, the Zephyrians were clearly competent logistics professionals. "Docking complete," reported Ensign Martinez from the engineering station. "They're requesting permission to board for cargo inspection." This was the moment of truth. Torres straightened her modified uniform, which had been designed to resemble the clothing worn by independent cargo haulers throughout the galaxy. The rest of her team was similarly disguised, their weapons concealed beneath loose-fitting work clothes. "Permission granted," she transmitted, standing by for inspection. The Zephyrian boarding party consisted of 3 individuals, 2 cargo handlers and what appeared to be a security supervisor. They moved through the Phantom's cargo bay with professional efficiency, scanning containers and checking documentation with the kind of attention to detail that suggested they took their job seriously. "These components," said the security supervisor, indicating several containers near the back of the cargo bay. "They are not standard mining equipment." Torres felt her heart rate spike but kept her expression neutral. "Specialized replacement parts for the atmospheric processors," she replied. "The mining consortium ordered them specifically for the platforms in this system." The supervisor studied his data pad for several moments before nodding. "Very well. Your cargo is approved for transfer. Proceed to unloading Bay 3. As the Zephyrian boarding party departed, Torres allowed herself a moment of relief. The first phase of the operation had been successful, but the real work was just beginning. Now they had to gather intelligence about the depot's operations while maintaining their cover as legitimate cargo haulers. "Initiate surveillance protocols," she ordered quietly. "I want detailed scans of everything. Cargo manifests, shipping schedules, security procedures, personnel assignments. If Captain Webb is right about this approach, we need to know exactly how the Zephyrian supply network operates." Over the next several hours, Torres and her team worked with methodical precision to document every aspect of the supply depot's operations. They planted microsensors in key locations, copied data from unsecured computer terminals, and photographed personnel and equipment. Most importantly, they identified the depot's vulnerabilities: critical systems that were inadequately protected, supply lines that could be easily disrupted, and personnel who might be susceptible to recruitment. By the time the Phantom depart, the intelligence reports from Operation Ghostwalk had fundamentally changed the dynamic aboard the Galactic Peacekeeping Fleet's command vessel. What had begun as preparation for a conventional military engagement was rapidly evolving into something far more complex and sophisticated. Captain Webb stood before a room full of alien commanders who were finally beginning to understand the scope of what humanity was proposing. The supply depot was only one node in a network that spans 3 star systems, Webb explained, manipulating the holographic display to show the intelligence gathered by Lieutenant Commander Torres and her team. The Zephyrians have created a logistics infrastructure that supports not just their current operations, but massive expansion of their military capabilities. Admiral Mordak studied the display with growing concern. The data revealed a supply network far more extensive than anyone had suspected, with manufacturing facilities, storage depots, and transportation hubs distributed across dozens of locations. "This is not a simple territorial grab," he rumbled. "This is preparation for a major military campaign." "Agreed," said Commander Alara, her crystalline form reflecting the light from the tactical displays. "But it also represents an opportunity. A network this extensive must have critical vulnerabilities." Webb nodded, highlighting specific points on the display. Torres's team identified 17 high-value targets whose destruction would cripple the Zephyrian war machine. But here's the interesting part. Most of these facilities are defended by commercial security forces, not military units. General Kithara leaned forward, her multifaceted eyes focusing intently on the data. "You're suggesting that the Zephyrians have concentrated their military forces to defend against a conventional attack while leaving their logistics infrastructure vulnerable to special operations?" "Exactly," Webb replied. "They've made the same assumption that everyone else has made, that the Galactic Council fights by the established rules of engagement. They never considered that we might simply ignore their battle fleet and attack their supply lines instead, Captain." Zethvar of the Vorthan Confederacy made a sound that the translator rendered as skeptical humming. "Even assuming you could successfully strike these targets, Captain, the strategic impact would be limited. The Zephyrian fleet would remain intact and capable of immediate retaliation." "That's true," Webb admitted. "But retaliation against what?" "The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require us to maintain vulnerable fixed positions. We hit their infrastructure, withdraw to safe distance, and let them deal with the consequences. He manipulated the display again, showing projected timelines for the degradation of Zephyrian capabilities following successful strikes against their logistics network. Without supplies, their manufacturing facilities shut down within days. Without manufacturing capabilities, they can't maintain their fleet or produce new weapons. Within weeks, they'll be forced to either surrender or abandon their positions to seek supplies elsewhere. The room fell silent as the assembled commanders studied the projections. Finally, General Vorth of the Hegemony Fleet spoke up, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of reluctant admiration. The strategy is sound in principle, but it requires a level of coordination and precision that has never been attempted in galactic warfare. You're proposing simultaneous strikes against 17 targets across 3 star systems. 18 targets, Webb corrected. Torres's team identified one additional facility that wasn't on our original list. A command and control center that coordinates all Zephyrian logistics operations in the occupied systems. Commander. Visitel of the Hive Mind Collective made a sound that the translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration. The mathematics are daunting. Even with perfect intelligence and flawless execution, the probability of successfully striking all targets simultaneously is less than 30%. Unless, Webb said quietly, we don't try to strike them all simultaneously. This statement caused another stir among the assembled officers. Admiral Mordak was the first to voice what several of them were thinking. Captain Webb, surely you're not suggesting a sequential campaign. The Zephyrians would adapt their defenses after the first few attacks. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Webb replied, but not in the way you're thinking. We don't attack the most obvious targets first. We start with the ones they'll assume are safe. He called up a detailed schematic of the Zephyrian supply network, highlighting specific nodes in red. These are facilities that perform critical functions but are so far from the main battle zone that the Zephyrians have left them essentially undefended. Small outposts, automated processing stations, communication relays. Individually, they're not worth a major military operation. Together, they're the foundation that everything else depends on. Commander Alara brightened with understanding. You would begin with peripheral targets to create systemic failures that cascade through the entire network. Exactly, Webb confirmed. We start small, targeting facilities that the Zephyrians won't even notice are missing until their effects become apparent. By the time they realize what's happening, the damage will be too extensive to easily repair. Captain Zethvar studied the proposed target list with growing interest. This approach would require specialized units capable of operating independently across vast distances. Do such forces exist within the Allied fleet? Webb smiled for the first time since the briefing began. They do now. Humanity has been developing small unit tactics for precisely this kind of operation. Our ships may not be as advanced as yours, but they're designed for stealth and independent operation. Perfect for what we're proposing. Over the next several hours, Webb outlined a comprehensive campaign plan that bore little resemblance to conventional galactic warfare. Instead of massive fleet engagements and orbital bombardments, he proposed a series of carefully coordinated strikes by small teams using stealth, deception, and precise application of force. The plan was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications for the future of military doctrine. The beauty of this approach, Webb explained as he concluded his presentation, is that it's scalable. Success breeds success. Each target we eliminate weakens the network and makes the remaining targets easier to attack. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian fleet sits in their defensive positions, waiting for an attack that will never come. Admiral Mordak had been unusually quiet during the later stages of the briefing, but now he spoke up with obvious reluctance. Captain Webb, I find myself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with your analysis. This approach has a higher probability of success than conventional assault, with significantly lower casualties among Allied forces. But, Webb prompted, sensing there was more to come, but it also represents a fundamental departure from established military doctrine, the Admiral continued. If we adopt these tactics, we will be setting a precedent that could destabilize the entire structure of galactic warfare. Other species will learn from our methods and adapt them for their own purposes. General Cathara made a sound that might have been laughter. Admiral, respectfully, that precedent may already be set. The Zephyrians have demonstrated that traditional deterrence is no longer sufficient to maintain galactic stability. Perhaps it is time for military doctrine to evolve. Commander Visital leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. There is wisdom in the general's words. The Hive Mind Collective has observed similar patterns of asymmetric resistance emerging in several sectors. The humans may simply be the first to formalize what others are already attempting informally. Webb looked around the room, studying the faces of the alien commanders. He could see the moment when the reality of the situation finally sank in. They were not just planning a military campaign, they were potentially reshaping the nature of warfare itself. The question, he said quietly, is whether we're going to lead this change or be victims of it. The Zephyrians have already demonstrated that they're willing to abandon conventional approaches when it suits their purposes. How long before other species reach the same conclusion? Admiral Mordak stood slowly, his massive form dominating the briefing room. Very well, Captain Webb. The Draconic Alliance formally endorses your proposed campaign plan, but understand that you will be held personally responsible for its success or failure. One by one, the other fleet commanders added their agreement, some with more enthusiasm than others. Within an hour, Webb found himself appointed as overall coordinator for what intelligence had designated Operation Broken Chain, the most unconventional military campaign in galactic history. As the meeting broke up and the alien commanders returned to their respective vessels, Webb remained behind to study the tactical displays. The plan was sound, but its success would depend on dozens of small teams executing complex operations across vast distances with minimal support. It was exactly the kind of challenge that humanity had been preparing for since joining the galactic community. The only question was whether they were truly ready to show the galaxy what humans were capable of when they stopped fighting fair. Operation Broken Chain began at 0300 Standard Galactic Time, with simultaneous strikes against 6 peripheral targets spread across the outer edges of Zephyrian-controlled space. The attacks were subtle, precise, and devastating in ways that wouldn't become apparent for days. A communications relay experienced what appeared to be routine equipment failure. An automated processing station went offline for scheduled maintenance and never came back online. A supply depot reported minor technical difficulties that prevented them from fulfilling shipment requests. Aboard the human stealth vessel, TSV Wraith, Sergeant Major Elena Rodriguez monitored the operation's progress while her team prepared for their own mission. The Wraith was one of humanity's newest military assets, designed specifically for the kind of deep penetration operations that conventional galactic forces had never needed to develop. Her hull incorporated stealth technology derived from centuries of human military innovation, making her effectively invisible to the sensor systems used by most galactic civilizations. Target acquisition confirmed, reported Corporal Kim from the sensor station. Zephyrian Logistics Hub at bearing 27 Mark 8, range 37,000 kilometers. Rodriguez studied the tactical display, noting the minimal defenses around their objective. The facility was a major distribution center that coordinated supply shipments to 3 different star systems, but it was protected by nothing more than a handful of security guards and basic perimeter sensors. The Zephyrians had never imagined that anyone would consider it worth attacking. "Take us in," Rodriguez ordered. "Remember, we want this to look like an accident. No obvious signs of sabotage. No evidence of military action. Just another industrial mishap in a dangerous galaxy." The approach took 3 hours, with the Wraith moving through the outer system's asteroid field to mask her approach. Rodriguez used the time to review the mission parameters one final time. Unlike conventional military operations, success would be measured not by the amount of destruction caused, but by how long it took the Zephyrians to realize they had been attacked at all. The target was a massive orbital facility that processed raw materials from dozens of mining operations before shipping them to manufacturing centers throughout Zephyrian space. According to intelligence reports, it handled nearly 40% of the refined metals used by their military-industrial complex. More importantly, it was a single point of failure whose destruction would create shortages throughout their supply network. "Docking approach initiated," reported Corporal Martinez from the helm station. "I'm reading standard civilian traffic patterns. Minimal security presence." Rodriguez nodded, watching as a steady stream of cargo vessels moved back and forth between the logistics hub and various mining operations. The facility was enormous, with dozens of processing modules connected by a complex network of transport tubes and storage bays. Destroying it conventionally would require a major military strike that would immediately alert the Zephyrians to the new threat they faced. But Rodriguez's team wasn't planning to destroy anything, at least not directly. "Remember," she told her team as they approached the docking bay, "we're maintenance contractors here to perform scheduled upgrades on the processing systems. Act bored, act professional, and don't do anything that might make anyone suspicious." The docking procedure went smoothly, with Zephyrian traffic control treating them as just another routine service call. Rodriguez found herself impressed by the casual efficiency of the operation. Whatever their political motivations, the Zephyrians were clearly skilled at large-scale logistics. The maintenance cover story had been carefully crafted based on intelligence gathered during previous operations. The processing systems used throughout Zephyrian space were manufactured by a consortium that included several species now allied with the Galactic Council. Legitimate maintenance contractors regularly visited facilities like this one to perform upgrades and repairs, making it the perfect cover for infiltration. "Authorization confirmed," came the response from Facility Control. "Proceed to Processing Module 7 for scheduled maintenance. Security will meet you at the docking port." Rodriguez led her team through the facility's corridors, carrying equipment cases that contained highly specialized devices designed by human military engineers. To casual observation, they appeared to be standard maintenance tools. In reality, they were sophisticated sabotage devices that would integrate seamlessly with existing systems while slowly corrupting their operation. "Impressive facility," commented the Zephyrian security supervisor who escorted them through the processing modules. "We've increased output by 30% since taking control from the mining consortium." "Industrial efficiency is always admirable," Rodriguez replied neutrally. "I trust our upgrades will help you maintain that level of productivity." The processing modules were exactly what intelligence reports had described. Massive automated systems that refined raw materials using precision chemical processes. The entire operation was controlled by computer systems that monitored thousands of variables and made constant adjustments to maintain optimal efficiency. It was also completely vulnerable to the kind of subtle sabotage that Rodriguez's team specialized in. "These processors are due for upgraded control algorithms," she explained to the security supervisor, while her team began connecting their equipment to the facility's computer network. "The new software will improve efficiency by approximately 15% while reducing maintenance requirements." What she didn't mention was that the upgraded algorithms contained carefully designed flaws that would cause gradual degradation in processing efficiency. The changes would be so subtle that they would appear to be normal equipment aging, rather than deliberate sabotage. By the time the Zephyrians realized what was happening, similar upgrades would have been installed throughout their logistics network. The installation process took 6 hours, with Rodriguez's team working with methodical precision to ensure that their sabotage would remain undetected. They installed software patches that would cause periodic equipment failures, modified sensor calibrations that would result in processing errors, and planted logic bombs that would activate months in the future to cause critical systems to malfunction at the worst possible moments. "Installation complete," Rodriguez reported to the facility supervisor. "Your systems should show improved efficiency within the next few days. If you experience any problems, standard maintenance protocols will resolve them." As her team prepared to depart, Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The operation had been flawless, with no indication that the Zephyrians suspected anything unusual. Similar teams were conducting identical missions throughout Zephyrian space, each one a small piece of a larger puzzle that would eventually bring down their entire war machine. "Departure clearance granted," came the response from traffic control. "Safe travels and thank you for your service." The irony of that statement was not lost on Rodriguez as the Wraith slipped away from the logistics hub and disappeared into the asteroid field. They had indeed provided a service, though not the one the Zephyrians thought they were receiving. 3 days later, the first signs of Operation Broken Chain's success became apparent. A major manufacturing facility reported unexpected delays in production due to contaminated raw materials. A fleet depot requested emergency resupply after discovering that their stored munitions had somehow become defective. A command center lost contact with 17 peripheral installations and assumed it was due to communication equipment failures. Captain Webb monitored the reports, From the Fleet Command Center aboard the TSV Defiance, watching as the Zephyrian logistics network slowly began to unravel. The beauty of the operation was its subtlety. Each individual incident appeared to be an isolated equipment failure or operational error. Only when viewed collectively did the pattern become apparent. Preliminary damage assessment from intelligence, reported Commander Singh, Webb's operations officer. Zephyrian logistics efficiency has decreased by 23% across all occupied systems. Manufacturing output is down 18% and falling. Most importantly, they don't appear to realize they're under attack. Webb nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the gradual degradation of Zephyrian capabilities. What's the status of their main fleet? Still maintaining defensive positions around the mining platforms, Singh replied. No apparent change in their readiness status or deployment patterns. They're still waiting for us to launch a conventional attack. This was exactly what Webb had hoped for. The longer the Zephyrian battle fleet remained focused on defending against threats that would never materialize, the more time his teams would have to systematically dismantle the infrastructure that kept them supplied and operational. Initiate Phase 2, he ordered. It's time to show them that their logistics problems are more serious than they think. Phase 2 of Operation Broken Chain involved direct attacks against facilities that were too critical to be eliminated through sabotage alone. But even these Straco. The end came not with the thunder of massive fleet engagements or the dramatic destruction of fortress worlds, but with a simple transmission broadcast on standard diplomatic frequencies. Admiral Kethmore of the Zephyrian Rebellion requested immediate negotiations for the terms of surrender, effective immediately. Captain Webb stood in the observation lounge of the TSV Defiance, watching through the viewport as the once mighty Zephyrian battle fleet powered down its weapons and began the complex process of standing down from full combat readiness. 3 weeks earlier, that same fleet had been considered invincible, protected by defensive positions that conventional military doctrine deemed impregnable. Now they were surrendering without having fired a shot in their own defense. The final assessment reports are coming in, announced Commander Singh as he joined Webb at the viewport. Zephyrian logistics efficiency has collapsed completely. Their manufacturing capability is down 93%. Their supply network has experienced total systems failure, and their command and control infrastructure is operating at less than 15% effectiveness. Webb nodded, but found little satisfaction in the numbers. Operation Broken Chain had achieved everything they had hoped for and more, demonstrating beyond doubt that conventional military thinking was obsolete in an age of asymmetric warfare. But the implications of their success went far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Any word from the Galactic Council? He asked. Singh's expression grew serious. Ambassador Chen reports that the Council is divided on how to interpret our success. Some species are calling it a brilliant innovation that should be adopted as standard doctrine. Others are suggesting that our methods represent a dangerous departure from accepted military ethics. The controversy had been building since the first reports of Zephyrian logistics failures began reaching the Council chambers. Traditional military commanders throughout the galaxy had watched in amazement as humanity achieved a decisive victory without engaging the enemy's main forces. But that amazement had quickly given way to concern as the implications became clear. The Draconic Alliance has formally requested detailed briefings on human tactical doctrine, Singh continued, as have the Crystalline Confederacy, the Ethereal Collective, and 6 other major powers. Everyone wants to understand how we did it. Webb turned away from the viewport, his expression troubled. And what exactly are we going to tell them? That the secret to military success in the modern galaxy is to abandon every principle of honorable warfare, that their civilizations have developed over millennia? The question had been weighing on Webb's mind since the operation began. Humanity's approach to the Zephyrian crisis had been effective precisely because it ignored the unwritten rules that governed galactic military conduct. Instead of seeking decisive battle against enemy forces, they had targeted civilian infrastructure. Instead of overwhelming firepower, they had used deception and sabotage. Instead of honor and glory, they had chosen pragmatism and efficiency. Sir, Singh said carefully, permission to speak freely? Granted. The galaxy was already changing whether we participated or not. The Zephyrians proved that conventional deterrence no longer works against opponents willing to accept massive casualties in pursuit of their goals. If we hadn't developed new approaches, someone else would have. Webb considered this as he watched Zephyrian personnel moving through the corridors of their disabled vessels, beginning the long process of preparing for occupation by Galactic Council forces. Singh was right, of course. The Zephyrian rebellion had demonstrated that the old ways of maintaining order were no longer sufficient. The question was what would replace them. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. "Captain Webb," came Admiral Mordak's translated voice. "Your presence is requested in the main briefing room. The Zephyrian leadership has agreed to formal surrender negotiations." The briefing room was crowded with representatives from every major power in the galactic peacekeeping fleet. Admiral Mordak sat at the head of the conference table, his massive form somehow managing to look both imposing and uncertain. Around the table, alien commanders who had spent their careers mastering conventional warfare struggled to process the implications of humanity's unconventional victory. At the far end of the room, a holographic projection showed Admiral Kethmore of the Zephyrian fleet. The alien leader appeared exhausted, his normally proud bearing replaced by the slumped posture of defeat. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been forced to confront the futility of his position. "The Zephyrian rebellion formally surrenders to the authority of the Galactic Council," he announced. "We are prepared to evacuate all occupied systems and return control of mining operations to their legitimate owners." Admiral Mordak leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Admiral Kethmore, the Council appreciates your decision to end hostilities. However, we require assurance that similar rebellions will not occur in the future." "You have that assurance," Kethmore replied bitterly. "We have learned that military superiority is meaningless when your enemies refuse to fight according to established rules. The humans have shown us the futility of conventional resistance." The statement sent a ripple of unease through the assembled commanders. Webb could see the concern in their alien features as they contemplated the implications of what had transpired. Humanity had not simply won a military victory, they had fundamentally altered the nature of galactic warfare. "The surrender terms are acceptable," Admiral Mordak announced after consulting with his staff. "Zephyrian forces will have 72 standard hours to evacuate all occupied systems. Any military assets that cannot be removed will be transferred to Council authority." As the formal negotiations continued, Webb found his attention wandering to the broader implications of their success. Every species in the galaxy would now be forced to reconsider their military doctrine in light of what humanity had accomplished. The age of massive fleet battles and overwhelming firepower was ending, replaced by an era of subtlety, deception, and asymmetric conflict. The meeting concluded with the standard diplomatic formalities, but Webb could sense the undercurrent of tension among the Allied commanders. They had achieved their objective, but at the cost of unleashing forces that no one fully understood or controlled. "Captain Webb," Admiral Mordak said as the other commanders began filing out of the briefing room, "a moment of your time, if you please." Webb remained behind as the room emptied, facing the massive draconic commander across the conference table. When they were alone, Mordak's carefully maintained diplomatic composure slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been concern. "What you have accomplished here," the Admiral said slowly, "represents a paradigm shift in military thinking. The Draconic Alliance has dominated galactic warfare for centuries through superior technology and conventional tactics. Now you have demonstrated that such advantages can be negated by opponents willing to abandon traditional approaches." "Admiral," Webb replied carefully, "humanity did not seek to challenge established military doctrine. We simply responded to the tactical situation using the tools and experience available to us." Mordak's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "Captain Webb, do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was merely an improvised response. Your species has fundamentally altered the nature of galactic conflict, whether you intended to or not." Webb could not argue with that assessment. The techniques they had developed for the Zephyrian operation would inevitably spread throughout the galaxy, adapted and refined by other species for their own purposes. Within a generation, every military force would need to master the arts of stealth, sabotage, and asymmetric warfare or risk obsolescence. "The question now," Mordak continued, is what humanity intends to do with the advantage you have created. You have shown that technological superiority can be overcome through superior tactics. That knowledge will not remain secret for long. Webb met the alien commander's gaze steadily. Humanity seeks only to take its rightful place among the galactic community, Admiral. We have no territorial ambitions beyond our current holdings and no desire to dominate other species. Perhaps not, Mordak replied, but you have given every minor power in the galaxy a weapon that can threaten major civilizations. The implications of that gift will be felt for centuries to come. As Webb made his way back to his quarters, he reflected on the truth of Admiral Mordak's words. Operation Broken Chain had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections, but that success had come at a price that was only beginning to become apparent. They had solved the immediate problem of Zephyrian aggression, but in doing so they had created new problems that would plague the galaxy for generations. The universe was about to become a much more dangerous place, and humanity had just shown everyone exactly why that was the case. The species that had been dismissed as primitive newcomers with obsolete weapons had instead proven to be the heralds of a new age of warfare. The galaxy had scoffed at humanity's weapons and methods, but they were no longer laughing. In a universe where overwhelming firepower forgotten, sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses.